Okay, let's just dive right in. When you hear the name Cleopatra, what do you see?
Hmm.
If you're like most people, you probably get this Hollywood image, right?
Hmm.
Elizabeth Taylor, draped in gold, the tragic love story, dying in these perfect silk sheets.
With the sweeping music playing in the background.
Exactly. And it's a powerful image. It's been reinforced for centuries by, Roman historians, by Shakespeare, by Victorian art. It's beautiful, it's dramatic, and it's a complete and deliberate sanitization of the truth.
It's a whitewash. And that romantic narrative, it served a very specific purpose for a very long time.
Right, for Rome.
For Rome, if you're Octavian, you want the world to believe that this powerful queen's downfall was emotional, that it was feminine, that it was all about heartbreak over Mark Antony.
Because that makes her seem weak. It minimizes the real story.
It completely minimizes the truth, which is that she was a highly sophisticated political operator who made a rational, cold, strategic choice to die. She did it to deny Rome their ultimate trophy.
So we're not here today to talk about a love story. Our mission in this deep dive is to take all these fragmented sources, the Egyptian court documents that survived, the later Greek historians like Plutarch, even the Roman accounts, which are, dripping with propaganda, and peel back that myth.
We want to get to the unspeakable truth of her final 23 days. Because her death wasn't an escape from heartbreak. It was a clinical, calculated strategy to escape a systematic horror that Octavian had meticulously planned for her. A horror worse than just dying.
Let's set that scene then. The immediate, brutal reality of her captivity. We're talking about the 23 days between her capture and her suicide.
And this is not a royal court anymore. You have to forget the perfumes, the gold, the silks, the palace she's in smells of unwashed bodies, of sweat, and the thick, musty leather of Roman legionary armor.
And the soldiers aren't standing guard outside the door.
No, that's the key detail. They are standing inside her chamber, watching her.
Every move, every breath, every time she closes her eyes to try and sleep. She's 39 years old. She's the last pharaoh of Egypt. And she's sitting on a rough wooden servant seat.
You could just imagine her feeling the grain of the wood through this thin linen shift. That's the only garment they let her wear. One simple piece of clothing, specifically designed to strip her of any regal presence.
And just a few months before this is a woman who commanded fleets. She spoke, 9 languages?
At least. Everything from Hebrew to Latin. She was revered by her people as the goddess Isis incarnate. She controlled the single wealthiest kingdom in the entire Mediterranean.
And now, she's property. She's a spectacle. And she can hear the guards, can't she, talking about her?
They're discussing her openly in Latin, just assuming she doesn't understand. Why would this barbarian queen speak the civilized language of Rome?
But she does. She understands every single word. She can probably taste the copper of blood in her mouth from where she's bitten her lip, just trying to stay composed.
The man in charge of her, this centurion Gaius Cornelius Gallus, has made it absolutely clear. Her survival depends entirely on her usefulness to Rome.
A usefulness that, as we're about to find out, was a constantly degrading and terrifying thing.
And what happened during those 23 days, especially during the nights, that is the key to understanding everything. To grasp why she made that final choice, we have to go back just a little to this spectacular collapse that brought her here.
So, just before this all falls apart, Cleopatra is, for all intents and purposes, untouchable. He said she was seen as Isis incarnate. What did that mean in a practical sense for her power?
It meant that her authority wasn't just political, it was divine. Every decree she issued carried the weight of a religious edict. She was the absolute ruler of Egypt, the mother of 4 children, one of them Julius Caesar's son. She could argue philosophy with the greatest scholars in the world at the museum in Alexandria.
She was the center of her universe.
Completely. And then comes the turning point, the disaster, the Battle of Actium on September 2nd, 31 BCE.
And the numbers alone are just staggering. They tell you how desperate the situation already was.
They really do. Antony has maybe 290 ships, a mix of heavy Roman warships and some from their allies. Cleopatra brings 60 of her best Egyptian warships, which were probably smaller, faster.
And they are facing Octavian's fleet, commanded by the brilliant General Agrippa,
who has 400 ships. It's a massive, coordinated force.
Yeah.
The odds were, frankly, impossible before the first arrow was even fired.
So this is where the historical debate gets really fascinating. Cleopatra is on her flagship, the Antonius. She's watching this unfold. She sees Agrippa's formation just closing in, crushing Antony's slower, heavier fleet. She sees ship after ship getting grappled, boarded, set on fire.
The sea is turning red with blood and black with smoke and ash. It's a catastrophe.
And then she gives the order that Roman historians would use for centuries to destroy her legacy. She tells her squadron of 60 ships to break the line and flee south back toward Egypt.
And Roman historians for 2,000 years have called this cowardice. The weak, treacherous woman abandoning her lover, abandoning the fight.
But if you look at it strategically, and modern historians have, it looks very different.
It looks like a cold strategic calculation, not panic. We have fragments from the Alexandrian archives that suggest she recognized the battle was already over. Her 60 ships, even if they fought to the last man, they weren't going to change the outcome.
So the calculation is simple. Better to save the last intact fighting force you have, preserve those experienced crews, than to just throw them away in a hopeless fight.
Exactly. Preserving that squadron was vital for the defense of Egypt itself. The war had just shifted from a naval battle to a land invasion. She was already thinking about the next move.
A move that Antony completely, catastrophically failed to understand.
He botched it entirely. He sees her sails turn south, and what does he do? He abandons his own flagship, his fleet, his men, everything that made him a Roman general, and he chases after her in a smaller, faster ship.
He just leaves the battle.
He leaves the battle, and the sources are chillingly precise about what happens when they finally meet up at sea.
They don't speak.
For 3 days. Imagine the silence on that small vessel, surrounded by the remnants of their defeated army. It says everything. The blame, the recriminations. He abandoned his men, she abandoned the fight. They were left with nothing.
And that journey back to Egypt, for Cleopatra, it was a psychological breakdown in real time. We have fragments from her attendant, Charmian, the one who dies with her at the end.
Yes, and Charmian's account is so clinical it sounds almost modern. She says the queen refused food, refused to speak. She would sit in her cabin writing letters and then immediately burn them.
And there's that one line that just sticks with you.
Her eyes are open, but they look at nothing in this world.
It's just a perfect description of acute psychological distress, of dissociation. Her body is there, but her mind is already starting to retreat from the unbearable reality of the situation.
And she understood that reality far better than Antony did. He was already descending into drink and self-pity. She was looking at the numbers.
The economic reality. That was the real killer, wasn't it?
Absolutely. The treasury was basically empty. It had been depleted, funding Antony's wars for years, and critically, the grain harvest had failed 2 years in a row.
So Egypt, the breadbasket of the ancient world, is facing famine.
Famine, civil unrest. Her allied kingdoms see the writing on the wall. They're defecting, cutting deals with Octavian. His agents are in every major city, undermining her authority.
He's on a clock, a hard deadline. Break out. And she has maybe 3 months before Octavian's legions are at the gates of Alexandria.
So she does what she does best. She strategizes. She launches 3 desperate plans all at the same time.
The first one is negotiation, the most rational move.
Right. She sends a message to Octavian. She offers to abdicate her throne completely in favor of her children. All she's asking for is guaranteed safety for them and maybe some small autonomous region for the Ptolemaic line to continue. She's trying to save the dynasty.
And Octavian's response is a masterclass in psychological warfare.
It's brilliant in a terrifying way. Doesn't say yes, but he doesn't say no. He just keeps her hanging. He dangles this thread of possible clemency just out of her reach, forcing her to stay put and wait while his armies just keep advancing unopposed.
Okay, so negotiation is a dead end. What's the second strategy?
Flee. She recognizes that whatever is left of the treasury is the key to any future she might have. So she loads it onto a fleet of 15 ships, gold, silver, gems, 3 centuries of Ptolemaic wealth.
And the plan is to sail them out through the Red Sea, around the Arabian Peninsula, and maybe set up a new base somewhere far away, maybe India.
It was a good plan, but her luck had just completely run out.
Don't tell me.
The entire fleet was captured, almost immediately. Arab tribes allied with Rome intercepted them before they even cleared the peninsula.
Wow, so her escape route is cut off and all that wealth is just gone.
Gone. Octavian had eyes and ears everywhere. He knew every move she was making.
Which leaves the third strategy.
To fight. Fortify Alexandria, train new crews for the few ships she has left. But it was always a long shot. Octavian had her so thoroughly boxed in.
The failure of all 3 of these strategies, that's what brings us to the most chilling part of her preparation, the methodical study of death.
She realized, with cold clarity, that her only guaranteed escape route, the only thing she could still control, was her own death. But it had to be perfect.
And this isn't speculation. This comes from multiple sources, right? Including fragments that ended up in the Vatican archives.
Correct. And later documented by the Greek physician Galen. She spent months testing poisons on condemned prisoners. She wasn't just randomly trying things. She was running what we would call clinical trials.
She's studying the mechanism of death, speed, pain, consciousness.
Exactly. And I want to spend a moment on the hemlock test because it tells you everything about her mind. A fragment from a Byzantine medical text describes her observing a prisoner being given hemlock.
Like Socrates.
Exactly like Socrates. And what did she observe? The death took 4 full hours.
4 hours.
And it's a creeping paralysis. It starts in your feet and your hands, and it slowly works its way up toward your diaphragm and your heart. And the crucial detail she noted was that consciousness was maintained almost until the very, very end.
So the prisoner's trapped, paralyzed, unable to move or speak, but fully aware as they are suffocating to death.
Yes. And her final assessment of this method, she wrote that it was unacceptable.
Unacceptable, because the whole point was to maintain dignity and control. Dying like that, that's just another form of torture.
Precisely. She was designing her own execution to be painless, quick, and to leave her body unmarred, dignified. This is when she shifted her focus to animal venoms, things that induced a quick, almost euphoric unconsciousness before death.
And all the while she's doing this, where is Antony?
Antony is effectively a ghost. While she's trying to save an empire and plan her own death, he's retreated into this structure he built on the harbor. He called it the Timonium.
Named after Timon of Athens, the famous misanthrope, the man who hated humanity.
I mean, for Antony, a man whose entire identity was built on Roman public life, on military command, on being adored by his men, to retreat into a self-imposed isolation named after a hater of mankind. It's the ultimate admission of psychological collapse.
So he's just drinking.
Drinking, gambling, sinking into a deep well of self-pity and rage.
So by the time Octavian's armies actually arrive at Alexandria, Cleopatra is effectively ruling alone.
Completely. Charmian's notes confirm this. She describes visiting the Timonium with the queen and finding Antony just insensible from wine. And the queen just sat there watching him breathe for an hour, calculating.
And what did she say when they left?
She reportedly told Charmian he is already dead. His body simply has not realized it yet.
Wow.
Antony was a dead weight. She knew it. The final desperate decisions were hers and hers alone.
Which sets the stage for this so-called final battle for Alexandria, which was really barely a fight at all.
It was a collapse. It was a theatrical gesture that was immediately followed by betrayal. On August 1st, 30 BCE, Antony actually rouses himself. He puts on his finest armor, gets on his horse, and leads what's left of his cavalry out to meet the Romans.
One last ride for the great general.
A gesture. But it accomplished nothing. His cavalry deserted him almost immediately. Some just surrendered to Octavian. Others literally just melted away into the desert. He was left standing alone.
And the final nail in the coffin came from the sea, from the fleet.
Cleopatra's last remaining fleet. Her last significant military asset. They didn't even attempt a skirmish.
What did they do?
They sailed out to meet the Roman navy, and instead of fighting, they just raised their oars in salute to Octavian's admiral, and then they joined his forces.
They just switched sides.
In an instant.
Yeah.
All that training, all that money, gone. Antony comes back into the city a completely broken man, having watched his own men become the enemy in the space of a few hours.
So by noon, Alexandria is basically undefended, and Cleopatra retreats.
She retreats to her mausoleum. This massive stone structure she'd built next to the Temple of Isis. It was designed to be her tomb, to house her body and her treasures for eternity. And she bars the doors from the inside. She locks herself in.
And this is where the tragic love story myth really kicks in. She sends a message to Antony telling him that she's dead.
Right. And the conventional story is that this is an act of despair that drives him to suicide. But if you look at the context, the betrayals, her strategic mind, it looks much more like a test.
A test of his resolve.
Yes.
Yeah.
Is he going to try and make one last humiliating deal with Octavian? Or will he do the Roman thing and follow her into death? She was demanding one final act of loyalty.
And he responds immediately. He draws his sword and stabs himself in the abdomen.
And this is the critical, non-romantic detail that destroys the propaganda. He botches it. Horribly.
This is everything important.
He misses the major arteries, the major organs. He pierces his intestines. The wound causes just tremendous agonizing pain and heavy bleeding, but it's not immediately fatal.
Oh,
So he's lying there, conscious, in agony, begging his servants to finish the job, to drive the sword home. And they refuse. They can't bring themselves to kill their master.
so the image of the great Roman general can't even get his own death right.
It's a devastating, messy, visceral reality, not a noble tragedy.
And then while he's lying there bleeding out, the second message arrives.
The second message arrives from the mausoleum. She's not dead. She needs him.
So they have to move him.
They lift him onto a litter, and they carry him across the city, a city that is now filling up with Roman soldiers. It's a spectacle. For about an hour, Antony is carried through the streets, conscious, talking, sometimes lucid, sometimes raving with pain, and he's leaving a visible trail of blood through his own defeated capital.
It's a public parade of his failure.
Absolutely. And when they finally get to the mausoleum, Cleopatra refuses to open the main doors. She's terrified the Romans will rush in and capture them both.
So she lowers ropes from an upper window.
She does. And you have to picture this scene strip of all the romance. It's Cleopatra and her two attendants, Charmian and Iris, 3 women, and they're struggling to haul this heavy, bleeding man up the stone wall.
The sources say his intestines were partially visible.
They were, through the gaping wound in his abdomen. And the struggle is immense. It takes many, many minutes. The queen, her arms trembling, straining with the effort, pulling on these ropes while Antony is slipping in and out of consciousness.
And they finally get him through the window.
They do. And he dies in her arms about an hour later. And she stays there, just clutching him for hours until her clothes are stiff with his dried blood. And that is the scene the Romans find when they break in the next morning.
The last pharaoh, covered in the gore of her failed partner, that's the image that starts her 23 days of captivity. And that moment of deep, visceral grief is immediately replaced by the cold, calculating machinery of Rome.
And the transition from queen to captive is just instantaneous. The man who physically seizes her is Gaius Proculus, one of Octavian's most trusted agents. He gets in through that same upper window, tricks the women into distracting her, and he grabs her by the wrist just before she can swallow that poison vial she had ready.
But she still has one last flash of defiance in her.
She does. She reportedly spits at him, "You will deprive yourself of a great subject for triumph."
And what does he say?
He just coldly retorts that she would also be depriving Caesar of a great occasion to display his clemency. It's the perfect Roman line, a threat veiled as mercy.
So they move her from the tomb to her own palace, which is now her prison, and as you said, the guards are inside.
Inside her bedchamber, inside her private spaces, the denial of her agency, her very self, begins immediately.
Her first meeting with Octavian happens a few days later, and the presentation is all part of the strategy, isn't it?
Oh, completely. She's brought before him barefoot. Her hair is uncombed. She's showing all the ravages of grief and sleeplessness. No jewelry, no cosmetics. She throws herself at his feet and begs for her children's lives.
And Octavian's focus is what?
Money. Not clemency, not her children. He relentlessly questions her about the location of her hidden treasures, the gold and silver she was rumored to have stashed away.
It's purely transactional.
100%. He tells her, flat out, that her continued existence depends entirely on her usefulness to Rome. As long as she provides value, she'll be cared for. The moment she ceases to provide value, quote, other arrangements will be made.
Her life, her body, is now just a commodity, an asset to be transported to Rome.
And this brings us to the interrogation method. This is the heart of the horror of those 23 days. And you have to get rid of the idea of crude physical torture.
Right. This isn't about leaving marks.
Exactly. The Roman system, especially under Octavian, was much more sophisticated. It relied on psychological pressure. It was designed to break the will, to break the spirit, without damaging the body.
Why? Why was that so important?
Because the body was required for the triumph. It was the prize. A battered, broken queen is actually less effective propaganda than a proud, beautiful queen who has been forced to submit. You need her intact for the show.
So the methods are surgical, designed to break the mind.
Precisely. And the man in charge of this was the night shift commander, Centurion Gaius Cornelius Gallus.
And he's an interesting figure because he was later rewarded for this, wasn't he? He became the first Roman governor of Egypt.
He did, which tells you that what he did was not the act of a rogue sadist. This was official Roman policy, and he was being rewarded for carrying it out effectively.
Okay, so let's break down the systematic brutalization. What's the first method?
The most insidious one, sleep deprivation. The guards had specific instructions to wake her the moment she started to drift off.
And this wasn't just random noise, this was calculated.
It was psychological warfare, a sudden loud noise right next to her ear. A lantern suddenly flashed in her eyes. Or, most invasively, a direct physical touch. A sharp poke, a hand on her shoulder, just as her breathing started to slow into sleep.
And we know today, sustained sleep deprivation, it completely breaks the mind. Within just a few days, you start having hallucinations, paranoia. Your judgment is totally impaired.
It creates a state of perpetual disorientation. She could never achieve deep rest. Her mind and body could never begin to heal or process the immense trauma she had just been through. Every time she closed her eyes, the Roman state was there to remind her, "We own you."
Okay, that's the first thing. What's the second?
The total denial of privacy and dignity. This was about erasing her sense of self as a sovereign, as a person.
So the constant observation.
Continuous. The guards watched her bathe. They watched her use the toilet. They watched her change her clothes. It wasn't just about surveillance to prevent suicide. It was a continuous, humiliating performance designed to remind her that she had zero control over her own body or her own environment.
And then there were the small humiliations.
Yes. Deliberately bringing her food late and cold. Giving her just enough water to keep her alive, but not enough to quench her thirst. These weren't accidents. They were systematic tools of degradation, designed to flatten her spirit, to make her feel like an animal.
And then we have to talk about the nights. The part that the Roman sources just gloss over, calling it her sufferings.
This is the unspeakable truth of her captivity. And it's why that romantic myth is so offensive. We have a fragmented source, quoted by a medieval-era historian who had access to the Alexandrian library archives before they were destroyed.
And what does it say?
It states that the Roman guards were, quote, given liberty with the queen during the dark hours on condition that no visible marks remained.
Given liberty, that phrasing is just chilling.
It's policy. Centurion Gallus, the knight commander, claimed this privilege for himself first, and then he distributed access to his favored subordinates as a reward.
So she was being systematically and repeatedly raped.
Yes, and the official Roman records would just call this her sufferings. This wasn't random cruelty. This was calculated political assault, designed specifically to break the will of a divine queen, to desecrate the very symbol of Egypt itself.
So if she shows up in Rome completely broken and degraded, Octavian can claim not just a military victory, but a moral one. He's tamed the monster.
Exactly. And it worked. The notes from her attendants are heartbreaking. After the first week of this, she stopped protesting. After the second week, she stopped reacting at all. Charmian describes this psychological retreat. She says the queen was no longer behind her eyes.
Which is such a powerful description of dissociation. It's a survival mechanism. Her mind is just checking out to protect itself from inescapable trauma.
She entered a profound state of psychological retreat. She just sat where they put her. She ate what they gave her. But she wasn't really there. She was a shell. And this is the state she was in when she finally learned exactly what Octavian had planned for her grand finale in Rome.
So she's in this profound state of psychological collapse, systematically broken down by Gallus and his men. And then the final blow lands. The details of the Roman triumph.
And we have to understand, the triumph wasn't just a victory parade. It was the ultimate public ritual of humiliation for the enemy.
It could last for days, right? Showcasing all the loot, paintings of the battle.
And most importantly, the captives. For royalty, the triumph was your last public appearance before you were executed. Usually by strangulation in the Tullianum, the state prison at the foot of the Capitoline Hill.
Tell us about the Tullianum. Why was that so symbolic?
The Tullianum, or the Mamertine prison, it was this ancient, dark, damp pit, a sewer, essentially. To be executed there, it meant not just death, but a death stripped of all honor, all dignity. Vercingetorix, the great Gallic leader, died there. It symbolized the absolute, crushing finality of Roman power.
And Cleopatra was meant to be the star of this show. She was the whole point of Octavian's triumph.
She was the centerpiece. He needed her to cement his own legitimacy and completely erase the legacy of Antony. She would be displayed in chains. Golden chains, maybe, to symbolize her wealth, but chains nonetheless.
And she would be forced to walk the entire route.
For hours. While the Roman citizens jeered at her, threw garbage at her, spat on her. And it was more than just that. He was using propaganda to totally dehumanize her.
So there would be paintings and effigies in the parade.
Huge paintings, depicting her not as a queen, but as a serpent, as a harlot who seduced good Roman men. as a monster who threatened the Republic itself. They would have a giant painting specifically showing her fleeing Actium like a coward. The whole spectacle was designed to turn her into a demon that Roan had righteously slain.
But the truly crucial detail, the one that finally shattered her dissociation and brought her back into a state of active calculation, was the plan for her children.
Exactly. Her three youngest children, the twins, Cleopatra, Selene, and Alexander Helios, who were 10, and little Ptolemy Philadelphia, who was only 6. They were going to be forced to walk in the triumph behind her.
So they would have to witness all of it. Their mother in chains being jeered at, humiliated.
And then they would have to witness her execution before they themselves would be distributed to noble Roman households as living prizes, as trophies.
And how did she find all this out?
From a sympathetic Roman officer named Dolabella. He visited her around day 20 of her captivity. He was apparently horrified by what Gallus was doing, and he felt he had to warn her about the entire horrific plan.
And then came the final, most devastating blow. After hearing about her own fate and the fate of her 3 youngest, she asks about her eldest son.
Caesarion. Her 17-year-old son with Julius Caesar.
And Dolabella has to confirm the worst.
He has to tell her that Caesarion, who was captured trying to flee to India, was already dead. He'd have been executed quietly shortly after the fall of Alexandria.
And the rationale.
The rationale that Dolabella was given was simple, cold, and brutally political. Too many Caesars is not a good thing.
He was the single greatest threat to Octavian's rule. The living, breathing proof that Julius Caesar's bloodline continued outside of Octavian's adopted family. He had to be eliminated.
And the sources say Cleopatra received this news in absolute silence. No tears, no screaming. She just sat there, still, and asked one question.
Was it quick?
Was it quick? And when Dolabella confirmed that it was, she just nodded once and said nothing more.
That silence, that was the moment she came back from that psychological retreat. That was the moment of decision.
Yes. Her choice was no longer about romantic grief for Antony. It was about political reality. And most profoundly, it was about maternal protection.
She knew she couldn't save her children from being captured.
But she could save them from the memory of watching their mother be publicly degraded, displayed as a monster, and then strangled to death in a Roman sewer. Her entire focus shifted in that moment, from survival to controlling the narrative of her own death.
So let's just throw out the romantic impulse entirely. This is a sophisticated political calculation. She's weighing her options.
And there's a brutal calculation. Option A, she lives. She endures a few more weeks of the assault and violation from Gallus and his men. Then she's paraded through Rome in chains. Then she's publicly executed, forcing her children to watch her final, utter submission.
The result of that is total victory for Octavian. He uses her body and her humiliation to consolidate his power for the next 40 years.
Exactly. Or option B, she dies now, on her own terms.
And if she does that, she instantly achieves 3 things.
1. Octavian is denied his greatest trophy. His triumph is diminished. 2. Her death is transformed from a humiliation into an act of defiance, a legend. And 3, most importantly, she spares her children the trauma of witnessing her degradation.
So when you lay it out like that, it's not really a choice, is it? It's the only political victory she has left.
It's the only move left on the board, and that strategic calculation is what drove her choice of weapon. The Egyptian cobra wasn't a romantic symbol, it was the tool.
It was the result of her research.
According to her months of methodical study, it was the quickest, most painless weapon available that would also leave the body unmarked and peaceful. The venom causes a rapid necrosis and cardiovascular failure, but it induces a state that's often described as a drowsy euphoria before death.
And an unmarked body was crucial. It preserved her dignity in death, which was the exact opposite of the spectacle Octavian had planned.
Absolutely. And the logistics of how she pulled this off, it's brilliant, because it's all about exploiting the enemy's assumptions.
So Octavian's guards, they know she's suicidal. They've taken away everything. The poison vial, any sharp weapons, even the pins from her hair.
They are hyper-vigilant for human instruments of death. Knives, poison, rope. They completely failed to anticipate her ingenuity.
So what was the plan?
It was elegant. Step 1. She requests permission to visit Antony's tomb one last time. This is a brilliant move because it establishes cooperation. The guards think she's finally resigning herself to her fate.
So they relax a little.
Exactly. Step 2. When she returns, she requests a final meal to be brought in a basket, which is a completely normal, customary thing for a royal prisoner.
And inside the basket,
concealed beneath a layer of figs or flowers, is the cobra. And the guards, who were trained to look for vials and blades, They inspect the basket. But they're not looking for a snake, they're looking for weapons.
She used their own limited imagination against them.
It was a perfect, subtle plan, and she knew she only had a few days before the ships were scheduled to leave for Rome. She knew she would not be on them.
So on the morning of August 12th, 30 BCE, she puts the plan into motion.
She goes to Antony's tomb, she weeps, she makes offerings. It's a final emotional performance for the guards, solidifying their belief that she is broken and resigned.
Then she comes back to the palace and makes her final preparations.
She bathes, which was an unusual request under the circumstances, and she dresses herself in her finest remaining royal linen and her jewelry. She was preparing for a ceremony, not for death, and then the basket arrived.
What happened next wasn't directly witnessed, but the scene the guards found when they finally broke down the door, it says everything.
They found her lying on a golden couch, dressed, as they said, as if for ceremony. She looked peaceful, as if she were just sleeping, unmarked.
And her servants were with her.
Iris, one of her most devoted attendants, was already dead at her feet. It's believed she died first, maybe to test the venom's effectiveness and speed for her queen.
And Chararmian, the one who kept the records, she was still alive. Barely.
She was performing one final, defiant duty. She was adjusting the crown on Cleopatra's head.
And when one of the Roman guards rushed in and yelled at her, asking if this was well done,
Chararmian gave the final verdict. Her last words were, "It is very well done and fitting for a princess descended from so many kings." And then she, too, fell dead beside her mistress.
So Cleopatra died on her own terms, in her own time, by her own choice.
And Octavian, when he got the news, was reportedly furious. He had been deprived of the centerpiece of his triumph.
But he still allowed her to be married beside Antony.
Which was a strange, grudging sign of respect. It was an acknowledgement that, in the final battle, she had won. He could take her kingdom, her children, her wealth, but he could not take her end.
So we have to look at the immediate aftermath, because even though she won that final battle, Rome still tried to erase her and her bloodline completely.
Octavian may have been denied his centerpiece, but he still had the children.
And they did walk in the triumph.
They did. Not behind their mother, but they walked. The twins, Alexander Helios and Cleopatra Selene, and little Ptolemy Philadelphia, wearing golden chains, displayed as living prizes to the Roman crowds. It was a demonstration of absolute Roman dominion.
And after the parade, they're taken into Octavian's own household. But you have to stress they were never adopted.
No, never. They were kept as living trophies, proof of Rome's victory, but never integrated into the family. They were pets.
And the fate of the two boys is just heartbreakingly vague.
It's a testament to the cold deficiency of Roman policy. Ptolemy Philadelphia, who was only 6, he just disappears from the historical record right after the triumph. The male twin, Alexander Helios, who was 10, he vanishes too.
So what's the assumption?
The widely held belief is that their continued existence just became politically inconvenient. Why risk them growing up and becoming a rallying point for Egyptian rebels or Roman dissenters? They were quietly disposed of, erased.
So only one of the children, Cleopatra Selene, survived into adulthood.
Only Selene. And she was eventually married off to Juba II, a Romanized African king, and they were made the nominal rulers of Mauritania in North Africa.
And her survival wasn't an act of mercy, was it?
No, it was a display of power. It was Rome showing off that they could domesticate even the most potent royal bloodlines. She could be a queen, but only under the absolute authority and control of Rome.
But the erasure continued, even into the next generation.
It did. Selene named her son Ptolemy, a direct link back to her lost dynasty. And that son, Ptolemy of Mauritania, was eventually executed by the Emperor Caligula for reasons that are still unclear. And with his death, the Ptolemaic line ended forever.
The erasure was finally complete. It took them 3 generations, but they did it.
Which brings us back to Cleopatra's original brutal strategy. She knew she couldn't save them from capture, but by choosing her own end, she spared them that final, horrifying memory of their mother in chains, degraded and strangled. Her suicide was a strategic gift of dignity to her heirs.
So this romantic myth we all know, the queen dying for love, it really just served Rome's purposes. It made her death seem emotional, feminine, irrational.
Instead of what it was, a rational, dangerous, political act. It conveniently distracted the world from the systematic degradation she endured for 23 days. From the psychological assault, the repeated violation, the total collapse of her agency at the hands of Centurion Gallus.
So in the end, her decision really aligns with a modern understanding of what we might call rational suicide under conditions of extremity.
Perfectly. She wasn't hysterical. She wasn't acting out of passion. She was a sophisticated political operator applying the same analytical mind she used to run an empire to her final problem. And she made a rational assessment that death was preferable to the specific, systematic horrors that Octavian had planned for her.
She transformed her own defeat into a final, enduring act of agency.
She did. And here's the final, remarkable piece of her defiance, something that continues to elude Rome and history to this day.
What's that?
Despite the total conquest of Egypt, despite the systematic erasure of her bloodline, Cleopatra's tomb has never been found.
That's fascinating. So after all of that, after taking her kingdom, her wealth, her children, her final resting place remains a secret.
It does. Somehow, in the chaos of those final days, she managed to ensure that the last piece of property Octavian could claim, her physical body, remained beyond his grasp, denying Rome the ultimate prize even in death. And you have to wonder, 2,000 years later, if that final hidden tomb isn't the last and most enduring monument to her defiance.